Use your hands. All of it. Or you're fired. Rotten fruit squished between her fingers. But the worst part. Ethan Kensington stood there watching. The man whose house she cleaned with pride every day. He just stood there in his expensive suit while his girlfriend forced Maya to scrub filth with her bare hands like an animal. Every second of silence was a choice. Rose's heart broke with each handful of trash, but what happened next was so shocking it left everyone speechless. Welcome back to Eva's Stories. I have missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. The morning sun painted Beacon Hill in gold as Ethan Kensington adjusted his navy tie in the mirror of his brownstone. At 32, he carried wealth like a second skin, comfortable, unnoticed, essential. His reflection showed sharp cheekbones, steel-gray eyes, and the kind of jaw that graced magazine covers. Success had been bred into him, inherited like the family name. Money solves everything, his father used to say. Everything but character. Blake's here, Vivian called from downstairs, her voice echoing through the three-story home. She appeared in the doorway wearing a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, her blue eyes bright with the confidence that came from never being told no. The charity gala planning meeting? Ethan asked, though he already knew. Vivian had been organizing the annual Hope for Tomorrow fundraiser for months. Of course. Though I still don't understand why we need so much staff for a simple dinner party. She wrinkled her nose. Speaking of which, that new cleaning woman better not break anything today. The last one chipped my grandmother's vase. Ethan nodded absently, his mind already on the Henderson merger documents waiting in his study. The Kensington Holdings empire demanded constant attention, and he'd built his reputation on never missing a detail. But when did I stop noticing the details that mattered? Blake Harrison burst through the front door without knocking, as he had since they were roommates at Harvard. His red hair was disheveled, his green eyes bright with excitement. The Singapore deal closed, Blake announced, grinning. 23% above projections. Excellent. Ethan felt the familiar satisfaction of another victory. That makes 4 major acquisitions this quarter. And it means you can afford that ridiculous engagement ring you've been eyeing, Blake said, winking at Vivian. Vivian's face lit up. Ethan, you haven't. Not yet. Ethan smiled, though something felt hollow in his chest. But soon. Why doesn't the thought of proposing fill me with joy? Why does it feel like another business transaction? 2 miles away in Roxbury, Rose Benson laced up her white sneakers in the dim light of her studio apartment. The November chill seeped through the single-pane windows, but she couldn't afford to run the heat during the day. At 29, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite circumstances that would break lesser souls. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed warm brown skin, kind dark eyes, and natural hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore the navy uniform required by premier domestic services. Pressed, clean, professional. Pride lived in the small details she could control. Mama always said dignity isn't about what they pay you. It's about how you carry yourself. The commute to Beacon Hill took 47 minutes on 2 different buses. Rose used the time to study, her community college textbook balanced on her lap. Business administration. Night classes twice a week, when she could afford them. The dream of owning her own cleaning company felt both impossible and inevitable. 3 more semesters. Then I'll never have to clean another person's mess again. I'll hire others, pay them fair wages, treat them like human beings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Lou at the Golden Dragon Cafe. Saved you lunch. Come by when you can. Rose smiled. Jenny was one of the few bright spots in her week, always ready with a kind word and hot soup on cold days. Real friendship didn't depend on bank accounts. The Kensington brownstone loomed before her at 8:30 a.m. sharp. Rose had been cleaning there for 6 weeks, ever since Mrs. Fletcher next door recommended her to Vivian Ashford. The pay was good, when Vivian remembered to pay on time. The work was hard but honest. I've scrubbed worse places for worse people. At least the house is beautiful. Rose rang the service entrance bell, her supplies organized in the cart beside her. She took pride in her work, in leaving spaces cleaner than she found them. Every surface she touched became a small canvas for excellence. "You're exactly on time," Vivian said, opening the door. She wore yoga pants and a cropped sweater, her hair in a messy bun that probably took 20 minutes to achieve. "I have people coming over this afternoon, so I need everything perfect." "Yes, ma'am. I'll start with the main floor and work my way up." "And Rose." Vivian's voice carried that particular tone Rose had learned to recognize. "Be extra careful with the crystal in the dining room. It's irreplaceable. Everything in this house is irreplaceable, except the people who clean it." Rose nodded and began her work, moving through rooms filled with art worth more than she'd make in a lifetime. She dusted each piece with reverence, understanding that beauty deserved respect regardless of who owned it. In the kitchen, she noticed the trash can overflowing. Coffee grounds spilled across the granite counter, and someone had left rotting vegetables in the sink. The mess spoke of carelessness, of people who never had to clean up after themselves. "I wonder what it's like to make a mess and know someone else will always clean it up." As she reached for the trash bag, Rose heard voices from the front hall. Mr. Kensington was home, along with his business partner and several other people. Their voices carried the confidence of those who owned the world. The trash bag was heavier than expected. As Rose lifted it from the can, the bottom gave way. Coffee grounds, eggshells, spoiled fruit, and kitchen scraps exploded across the pristine marble floor. The mess spread like shame, staining everything it touched. Rose's heart stopped. No, not today. Not with company here. She heard footsteps approaching and Vivian's sharp intake of breath. In that moment, Rose Benson, daughter, student, dreamer, became just another problem to be solved. "What have you done?" Vivian's voice cut like winter wind. And Rose knew, with the certainty of someone who had been poor her entire life, that this moment would change everything. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Rose stared at the explosion of garbage across the marble floor, her reflection fractured in puddles of spilled coffee. Banana peels clung to the white baseboards. Crushed eggshells created a constellation of destruction across the stone. Vivian stood in the doorway, her face twisted with disgust. Behind her, the voices of Ethan's guests grew louder. The charity gala planning committee had arrived early, their designer heels clicking against hardwood as they approached. "I cannot believe this," Vivian hissed. "Look what you've done to my floor." Rose's hands shook as she knelt beside the mess. "I'm so sorry, Miss Ashford. The bag must have had a tear. I'll clean this up right away." "You'll clean it up?" Vivian's voice rose an octave. "With what? Your mop. That disgusting water you use. I have cleaning supplies in my cart. I can get the floor spotless in 15 minutes. 15 minutes? Vivian laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. I have the mayor's wife coming through that door any second. I have photographers arriving to document our planning session for Boston Magazine. And you want to splash dirty mop water around my foyer?" Rose reached for a paper towel from her supplies, but Vivian's hand shot out, stopping her. "No. No cleaning supplies. No mop. No towels." Rose looked up, confusion clouding her dark eyes. "Ma'am, you made this mess with your carelessness. You'll clean it with your hands. Every piece. Every drop. That's what I pay you for, isn't it? To use whatever it takes to keep my home clean." The words hit Rose like a physical blow. She glanced toward the kitchen, where her supplies cart waited, then back at the rotting vegetables and coffee grounds coating the floor. "Miss Ashford, please. I have rubber gloves in my cart. I can clean this properly." "I said no supplies." Vivian's blue eyes glittered with something cold. "Use your hands. All of it. Or you're fired." Rose's breath caught in her throat. This job paid 3 times what she made anywhere else. Without it, she couldn't afford her apartment, couldn't pay for school, couldn't help support her elderly aunt in the nursing home. She looked at her hands, thinking of the textbook she'd touched with these same fingers, the dreams she'd built with these same palms. Dignity isn't about what they pay you, but survival trumped dignity. It always had. Rose knelt and began picking up the larger pieces of garbage with her bare hands. A moldy orange peel squished between her fingers. Coffee grounds stuck under her nails. The smell of rotting vegetables filled her nose as she worked, piece by degrading piece. "That's better," Vivian said, her voice carrying satisfaction. "Much better." From the living room came the sound of the front door opening. Mrs. Catherine Wells, the mayor's wife, entered with her usual entourage. Her voice carried clearly as she greeted someone. "Vivian, darling, how lovely to see you. I hope we're not too early." "Not at all," came Vivian's reply, suddenly sugar-sweet. "We're just handling a small domestic issue. Nothing that can't be managed." Rose's cheeks burned with shame as she gathered handfuls of soggy coffee grounds. This was what she'd become in Vivian's eyes. A domestic issue. A problem to be managed. Blake Harrison appeared in the kitchen doorway, his red hair catching the afternoon light. His green eyes widened as he took in the scene. Rose on her knees in garbage, Vivian standing over her like a plantation overseer. "Jesus. Vivian. What happened here?" "Just a clumsy accident," Vivian said smoothly. "Nothing that can't be fixed with the right approach." Blake's face registered something Rose couldn't quite read. Discomfort. Disgust. She couldn't tell if it was directed at the mess or the method of cleaning it. "Maybe we should get some cleaning supplies," Blake suggested. "Absolutely not. She needs to take responsibility for her mistakes. That's how people learn." Rose's hands moved mechanically, scooping up debris while her mind screamed protests she couldn't voice. Each handful of trash felt like another piece of her dignity stripped away. But she needed this job. She needed the money. She needed to survive. The front door opened again. More voices filled the hallway. The charity committee members were arriving for their meeting, their laughter bright and carefree. Rose could hear them complimenting the house, admiring the artwork, discussing their plans to help the less fortunate at their upcoming gala. The less fortunate. That's me. I'm the less fortunate they're planning to help, and here I am, cleaning their garbage with my bare hands. "Vivian." Mrs. Fletcher's voice drifted from the front hall. The elderly neighbor had arrived with her usual punctuality. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Mrs. Fletcher." Perfect timing. "We were just finishing up a small matter." Rose heard the click of heels approaching. Mrs. Fletcher appeared in the kitchen doorway, her gray hair perfectly styled, her kind eyes taking in the scene. Those eyes, which had always held warmth when they looked at Rose, now filled with something else. Horror. "Oh my," Mrs. Fletcher whispered. "Nothing to worry about," Vivian said quickly. "Just a minor accident being properly addressed." Mrs. Fletcher's gaze moved from Rose to Vivian, then to Blake, who shifted uncomfortably. "I see." Rose's hands were black with coffee grounds now, sticky with fruit juice, reeking of decay. She avoided Mrs. Fletcher's eyes, focusing on the task at hand. Just get through this. Just survive this moment. "Perhaps," Mrs. Fletcher said carefully, "we could provide some proper cleaning materials?" "That won't be necessary," Vivian replied, her voice firm. "This is a matter of personal responsibility." Rose heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, masculine, measured. Ethan Kensington was coming down from his study, probably drawn by the voices. Rose's stomach clenched tighter. Bad enough to be humiliated in front of Blake and Mrs. Fletcher. But her employer? The man who signed her paychecks? What's all the commotion? Ethan's voice carried from the hallway. Rose kept her head down, focusing on gathering the last of the large pieces. Maybe if she stayed quiet, stayed invisible, this nightmare would end. "Nothing important," Vivian called back. "Just dealing with some hired help issues." Hired help issues. The words cut deeper than anything else. Rose wasn't even a person in Vivian's vocabulary. She was an issue. A problem. A thing to be managed. Ethan's footsteps approached the kitchen. Rose could see his expensive leather shoes come into view, stopping at the edge of the mess. Italian leather, probably handmade, probably worth more than she made in a month. Good God, Ethan said quietly. What happened? The cleaning woman dropped the trash bag, Vivian explained, her tone suggesting Rose had committed some unforgivable sin. I'm teaching her the proper way to handle her mistakes. Rose's hands trembled as she reached for a cluster of eggshells. The sharp edges cut into her palm, drawing thin lines of blood that mixed with the coffee grounds. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Vivian, Ethan said, his voice strange. She's bleeding. She'll be fine. Won't you, Rose? You're tougher than you look. Rose nodded without looking up, because what else could she do? Agree or lose her job. Submit or starve. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. But something was building in the room. She could feel it in the silence that followed Ethan's observation. A tension that hadn't been there before. Blake shifted from foot to foot. Mrs. Fletcher made a small sound of distress. And Ethan Kensington, billionaire heir to a shipping fortune, stood perfectly still, watching a woman bleed while cleaning garbage with her bare hands in his kitchen. Rose gathered the last of the visible debris, her hands full of rot and shame. But there were still coffee grounds ground into the marble, still stains spreading across the pristine floor. She would need to crawl across the stone, using her palms to scrub, her fingers to dig into every crevice. The floor still needs attention, Vivian observed. You can't leave it half-finished. Rose looked at the marble expanse before her, then at her dirty, bleeding hands. This was the moment. The choice between dignity and survival. Between her mother's voice in her head and the rent notice on her table. She placed her palms flat against the cold marble and began to scrub. The silence in the room grew heavier with each movement. Rose could hear the party continuing in the front of the house, could hear Mrs. Wells discussing flower arrangements, could hear someone laughing about summer plans in the Hamptons. Normal sounds from a normal world where normal people didn't clean floors with their bleeding hands while others watched. Rose scrubbed methodically, her training as a cleaner taking over even in this degradation. Circular motions. Even pressure. Work from the outside in. The skills her mother taught her, perverted into something ugly. What would Mama think of this? What would she tell me to do? But Rose knew what her mother would say. The same thing she'd always said when life got hard. Baby girl, sometimes surviving is the only victory we get. Hold your head up and survive. So Rose scrubbed the marble floor with her bare hands, bleeding into coffee grounds, while Ethan Kensington watched in silence and Vivian Ashford smiled. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Rose's palms against marble. Each scrub left thin streaks of blood mixed with coffee residue. Ethan watched those red trails appear and disappear under her desperate movements, something cold and terrible growing in his chest. This is wrong. This is fundamentally, completely wrong. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't act. Years of boarding school training kicked in. Don't make scenes. Don't cause confrontations. Handle problems privately, quietly, efficiently. The Kensington way had always been to avoid public embarrassment at all costs. But whose embarrassment am I protecting? I think that's sufficient, Mrs. Fletcher said finally, her voice tight with controlled emotion. The floor looks quite clean now. Vivian glanced at the elderly woman with mild irritation. I'll decide when it's sufficient, thank you. Of course, dear. Mrs. Fletcher's tone carried decades of practice dealing with difficult people. I simply meant that Rose has worked very hard to fix her mistake. Her mistake, Vivian repeated, as if the words tasted bitter. Yes, well, mistakes have consequences. Don't they, Rose? Rose nodded without looking up, her hands still moving across the stone. The coffee stains were gone, but she kept scrubbing, afraid to stop without permission. Ethan felt Blake's eyes on him, questioning, challenging. His business partner's face showed clear disgust, but not just at the mess. At the entire situation. At him for allowing it to continue. Why haven't I stopped this? Why am I standing here like a statue? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. Because stopping it would mean confronting Vivian. And confronting Vivian would mean admitting he'd chosen the wrong woman. And admitting that would mean facing truths about himself he wasn't ready to examine. Ethan. Mrs. Wells called from the living room. "We're ready to begin the planning session whenever you are." "Coming," he replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. He looked down at Rose one more time. Her uniform was stained, her hands were raw, her dignity stripped to nothing. And he was walking away. Coward. The thought followed him into the living room where the charity committee had assembled. 6 of Boston's most prominent socialites sat in his leather chairs, discussing their upcoming gala to help the disadvantaged members of our community. "The theme this year is Hope Rising," Mrs. Wells explained, her manicured hands gesturing elegantly. "We want to focus on giving opportunities to those who need them most." Ethan nodded automatically, but his mind remained in the kitchen. On bleeding hands. On the sound of palms scraping stone. On the way Rose had kept working even when it hurt. "We're planning a party to help people like her while she bleeds on my kitchen floor. The silent auction should raise at least $50,000, continued Margaret Prescott, another committee member. "I've secured donations from several local businesses. Art pieces, vacation packages, that sort of thing." "Wonderful," Vivian said, entering the room with her usual bright smile. She'd washed her hands, Ethan noticed. Cleaned herself of any evidence of what had just occurred. "I'm sorry for the delay. We had a small domestic situation to resolve." Domestic situation. The casual dismissal made Ethan's stomach turn. "Nothing serious, I hope," Mrs. Wells said politely. "Oh no, just teaching proper standards. You know how it is with help these days. They need clear guidance about expectations." The women nodded knowingly, as if they all dealt with similar guidance issues. Ethan wanted to scream. He wanted to stand up and tell them exactly what kind of guidance Vivian provided. Instead, he sat in his expensive chair and said nothing. Blake entered the room, his face carefully neutral. "Sorry to interrupt. I need to make a few calls before our 4 o'clock meeting." "Of course," Ethan said, grateful for any excuse to escape. "Use my study." But Blake didn't move toward the study. He stood in the doorway, his green eyes fixed on Ethan with unmistakable disappointment. "He's judging me. And he's right to." "Actually," Blake said carefully, "I was wondering if we might need to provide any medical attention for our staff member." The room went quiet. Vivian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Medical attention?" Mrs. Wells asked. "Whatever for?" "She had a small injury," Blake explained. "Nothing major, but we should probably make sure it's properly cleaned." "How thoughtful of you," Mrs. Fletcher said, appearing in the doorway. "I was thinking the same thing. In fact, I have a first aid kit in my purse if needed." Ethan felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. As the host, as the employer, as the man of the house, everyone was looking to him to handle the situation. To show leadership. "This is the moment. This is when I decide who I really am." "That won't be necessary," Vivian said quickly. "I'm sure she's fine. These people are tougher than they look." These people. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a fire. "Nevertheless," Mrs. Fletcher said firmly, "I think we should check. It's the decent thing to do." "I agree," Blake said, his voice carrying an edge Ethan had never heard before. "We should definitely check." All eyes turned to Ethan. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility. He could stand up right now. He could insist on proper medical attention. He could demand that Rose be treated with basic human dignity. Or he could take the easier path. Avoid confrontation. Keep the peace. Maintain the status quo. "What kind of man am I?" "Vivian's right," he heard himself say. "I'm sure she's fine. These minor workplace incidents happen. We shouldn't make a big deal out of it." The words felt like ash in his mouth, but he'd said them. Chosen safety over courage. Comfort over conscience. Blake's face went very still. Mrs. Fletcher's lips pressed into a thin line. Even Mrs. Wells looked uncomfortable. "Well then," Mrs. Wells said after a moment, "perhaps we should continue with our planning." The meeting resumed, but the energy had changed. Conversations felt forced. Laughter felt hollow. Everyone was thinking about the woman in the kitchen, about the blood on marble, about the choices they'd all made in the last hour. Ethan participated mechanically, approving budgets and vendor selections while his mind churned with self-loathing. He'd had his moment to be the man he thought he was, and he'd failed completely. But it's just a job for her. She gets paid well. This one incident doesn't define everything. Even as he thought it, he knew he was lying to himself. Making excuses. Rationalizing cowardice. In the kitchen, Rose finished cleaning the floor and began packing her supplies. Her hands shook as she loaded bottles into her cart, the cuts on her palms burning with each movement. The humiliation sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. I need this job. I need this money. I can survive this. But something had broken inside her during those 20 minutes on her knees. Some part of her that had always believed in the basic goodness of people, in the possibility that hard work and dignity would eventually be rewarded. They watched me bleed and did nothing. They're in there right now planning a charity event to help people like me, and they watched me bleed. She thought about her aunt in the nursing home, about the tuition payment due next month, about the stack of bills on her kitchen table. All of it depended on this job, on her ability to swallow pride and endure whatever came next. But how much can one person endure? From the living room came the sound of laughter. Someone had made a joke about flower arrangements, and the committee found it hilarious. The sound felt obscene after what had happened. Rose wheeled her cart toward the service entrance, moving as quietly as possible. She didn't want to see any of them again today. Didn't want to face their eyes, their smiles, their casual dismissal of her humanity. But as she reached for the door handle, she heard footsteps behind her. Rose! Blake's voice was soft, careful. Wait. She turned reluctantly, expecting another lecture about being more careful, about taking responsibility for mistakes. Instead, Blake extended a small white envelope. This is from me, not from Ethan or Vivian. It's not much, but it should cover any medical expenses you might need. Rose stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Kindness felt almost more dangerous than cruelty right now. At least with cruelty, she knew where she stood. I don't need charity, she said quietly. It's not charity. It's an apology. From someone who should have done more to stop what happened. Their eyes met for a moment, and Rose saw genuine remorse there. It was something, at least. Not enough, but something. Thank you, she said, taking the envelope. Rose! Blake hesitated. What happened today? That's not normal. That's not how people should treat each other. But it is normal for people like me. This is exactly how the world works. I understand, Rose said instead. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I understand how we all just stood there and watched. Rose looked toward the living room, where the charity planning continued, where people who would spend thousands of dollars to help the disadvantaged had just watched one of them bleed on a kitchen floor. Some people matter, she said simply. And some people don't. That's just how it is. Blake flinched as if she'd slapped him. It doesn't have to be, doesn't it? But Rose was too tired to argue with naive optimism. She nodded politely and left through the service entrance, stepping out into the November cold. Behind her, the charity planning session continued. In front of her, the bus stop waited with its hard bench and unpredictable schedule. Around her, the city moved with its usual indifference to individual suffering. And somewhere in the space between dignity and survival, Rose Benson began to understand that this job was going to cost her more than she'd ever imagined. Inside the house, Ethan excused himself from the meeting and climbed the stairs to his study. He closed the door behind him and stood at the window, looking out at Beacon Hill's tree-lined streets. I am not the man I thought I was. The realization sat heavy in his chest, immovable as granite. He'd built his entire identity around being decent, fair, better than his father's generation. But when it mattered, when decency required courage, he'd chosen silence. And tomorrow I have to face myself in the mirror. Tomorrow Rose would return to clean his house. Tomorrow Vivian would smile and plan their future. Tomorrow Blake would look at him with disappointment barely hidden behind professional courtesy. But right now, in this moment, Ethan Kensington sat alone with the knowledge that he was exactly the kind of man he'd always despised. Rose almost didn't come back. She'd stood at the bus stop for 20 minutes, Blake's envelope heavy in her pocket, watching 3 buses pass without boarding. Her aunt's nursing home bill sat unpaid on her kitchen table. Her community college tuition was due in 6 days. The math was brutal and simple. She needed this job, no matter the cost to her soul. One more day. Just survive one more day. The Beacon Hill morning was gray and bitter, matching her mood perfectly. Rose rang the service bell at exactly 7:30 a.m., her supplies cart organized with military precision. If she was going to endure this job, she would do it with the professionalism her mother had taught her. No answer. She rang again, checking her watch. Vivian was usually awake by now, coffee in hand, ready with the day's list of impossible expectations. The silence felt ominous. The front door opened suddenly, startling her. Ethan Kensington stood there in gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt, his hair disheveled, his eyes rimmed with red. He looked like he hadn't slept. Good. Maybe his conscience kept him awake. "Rose," he said, her name coming out strange and careful. "You came back." Did he expect me not to? Did he think one day of humiliation would be enough to make me quit? "Yes, sir." "Where would you like me to start today?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or disappointment that she wasn't acknowledging what had happened yesterday. What did he want? Tears? Accusations? "I can't afford either." "Vivian's not here," he said after a moment. "She left early this morning for New York. Gallery opening with friends. She won't be back until Sunday." Rose processed this information carefully. No Vivian meant no immediate threat of humiliation, but it also meant being alone in the house with a man who'd watched her bleed and done nothing to stop it. "Should I come back when she returns?" "No." The word came out too quickly, too sharp. Ethan caught himself. "I mean, the house still needs cleaning. And I'll be working from home today, so someone should be here." Rose nodded and moved toward the service entrance, but Ethan stopped her with a gesture. "Use the front door," he said. "There's no reason for you to go around back." "Since when?" Vivian always insisted on the service entrance. But Rose wasn't about to argue with anything that made her job easier. She followed him through the foyer, noting how he carefully avoided looking at the spot where she'd scrubbed yesterday. "Coffee?" he asked suddenly. "I was just making some." Rose blinked in surprise. In 6 weeks of working here, no one had ever offered her coffee. Or anything else, for that matter. "No thank you, sir. I should get started." "Ethan," he said. "You can call me Ethan." "No, I can't. That's not how this works. I prefer to keep things professional, Mr. Kensington." He flinched slightly at the formal address, and Rose felt a small, petty satisfaction. If he wanted to ease his conscience with coffee offers and first names, he'd have to work harder than that. "The usual rooms?" she asked, pulling on her cleaning gloves. The cuts on her palms stung as the rubber stretched over them. "Actually," Ethan said, watching her wince, "maybe you could start with my study today. It's been neglected." Rose followed him up the stairs, hyper-aware of his presence behind her. The study was a masculine space filled with dark wood and leather, law books and financial journals. It smelled like expensive cologne and old paper. This is where he makes his money. Where he decides which companies to buy and which people to destroy. "I'll be working on the computer," Ethan said, settling behind a massive oak desk. "Don't mind me." But Rose did mind him. His presence filled the room, making every movement feel observed and judged. She started with the bookshelves, dusting each volume with careful attention. "Rose," Ethan said after 10 minutes of tense silence. She didn't look up. "Yes, sir." "About yesterday." Here it comes. The explanation. The justification. The apology that costs him nothing. "I should have said something." Rose continued dusting, her movements steady and mechanical. "It's not my place to comment on household decisions." It's not about household decisions. It's about treating people with basic dignity. Now he's an expert on dignity. I understand, sir. Do you? Because I'm not sure you should. Rose finally looked at him. He was leaning back in his leather chair, studying her with those steel-gray eyes that missed nothing in business but had somehow missed everything that mattered yesterday. Should what, Mr. Kensington? Understand. Forgive. Accept what happened as normal. But it is normal. This is exactly how the world works. I need this job, Rose said simply. Understanding is a luxury I can't afford. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Tell me about yourself. Sir. Your life. Your story. I realize I know nothing about you except that you clean my house. Rose felt danger in the question. Personal conversation meant getting closer, and getting closer meant vulnerability. She couldn't afford vulnerability with this man. There's not much to tell. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story, but not everyone gets to tell it. I clean houses. I go to school at night. I pay my bills. That's the story. What are you studying? Rose hesitated. Talking about her dreams felt like exposing a wound. But something in his tone made her answer. Business administration. I want to start my own cleaning company someday. That's ambitious. Is it? Or is it the only path available to someone like me? It's practical. I understand the work, I know what clients want, and I can treat employees better than most companies do. The last part slipped out before she could stop it. Ethan's face went very still. Better how? Damn it. Keep your mouth shut. Just better, Rose said, returning to her dusting. Rose. His voice was gentle but insistent. How would you treat employees better? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rose set down her dust cloth and turned to face him fully. I'd pay them living wages. I'd provide proper equipment and safety training. I'd treat them like human beings instead of disposable objects. And I'd never, ever ask them to clean up messes with their bare hands while I watched. The words came out with more force than she'd intended. Years of swallowed anger and buried resentment poured into that single statement. Ethan absorbed the blow without flinching. You have every right to be angry. I don't have any rights, Mr. Kensington. That's what yesterday taught me. That's not true. Isn't it? You watched a woman bleed on your kitchen floor and did nothing. Your girlfriend humiliated another human being and you supported her. So tell me, what rights do I have in your world? Ethan stood up from his chair, moving to the window that overlooked Beacon Hill. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right, and I have no excuse. An apology. Finally. But what good does it do now? Apologies don't pay bills, Rose said. No, they don't. But they're a start. A start toward what? Ethan turned back to face her. Toward being the person I thought I was instead of the person I proved to be yesterday. Rose stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation or false sincerity. All she saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. Pretty words don't change anything, Mr. Kensington. You're right again. Actions change things. So let me ask you something. He paused, seeming to gather courage. If you could change anything about how domestic workers are treated, what would it be? Is this a test? A trap? What does he want from me? Why do you care? Because I should have cared yesterday, and I didn't. Because I want to understand what I allowed to happen. Rose studied his face, looking for deception. Finding none, she answered honestly. Respect, she said. Just basic human respect. We're not invisible. We're not stupid. We see everything, hear everything, know more about your lives than you think we do. But you look through us like we're not even there. What else? Fair pay. Consistent schedules. Basic benefits. The right to be sick without losing our jobs. The right to make mistakes without being humiliated. And if someone treated you that way, with respect and fairness, then I'd work harder for them than anyone else ever had. Loyalty is earned, Mr. Kensington. It's not part of the job description. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. A phone rang downstairs, breaking the intensity of the moment. Ethan glanced toward the sound, then back at Rose. I should get that. It might be important. As he left the study, Rose sank into the chair she'd been standing beside. The conversation had drained her, forced her to articulate feelings she'd kept buried for years. But something else had happened too. For the first time since she'd started this job, someone had actually listened to her answers. Don't trust it. Don't trust him. Rich men don't suddenly develop consciences overnight. But as she returned to her cleaning, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in this house. Whether that shift would help her or hurt her remained to be seen. From downstairs came the sound of Ethan's voice on the phone, professional and confident. The voice of a man who controlled millions of dollars and hundreds of lives. But up here in his study, surrounded by his books and his success, Rose had seen something different. Uncertainty. Regret. Maybe even the beginning of genuine change. Don't hope for too much. Hope is dangerous when you can't afford disappointment. But as she dusted his desk, her fingers brushed against a leather-bound journal left open to today's date. The handwriting was bold and clear. I am not the man I thought I was. Rose Benson deserves better than what happened yesterday. They all deserve better. Question. How do I become someone worthy of the respect I demand but have never earned? Rose stared at the words, her heart beating faster. This wasn't for show. No one was supposed to see this private admission, this moment of raw self-examination. Maybe people can change. Maybe some people are worth a second chance. The thought scared her more than yesterday's humiliation had. Hope was more dangerous than despair. Despair was predictable, manageable. Hope could destroy you when it proved false. But as she continued cleaning Ethan Kensington's study, Rose Benson found herself wondering if she was about to find out whether miracles were real or just another lie the powerful told to ease their consciences. Either way, she was about to discover that being trapped in this house with this man was going to change everything she thought she knew about herself, about him, and about what was possible when two broken people tried to find their way back to being human. Rose was polishing the silver picture frames on Ethan's bookshelf when she found it. Hidden behind a larger photograph of Ethan with some business associates was a smaller frame, face down and dusty from neglect. Her cleaning instincts kicked in automatically. She lifted it to dust underneath. The photograph stopped her breath. A young black woman smiled back at her from the frame. She wore a simple blue dress and held the hand of a little boy with Ethan's gray eyes and stubborn chin. The boy couldn't have been more than 7, his face bright with uncomplicated joy as he looked up at the woman beside him. Who is she? Why is this hidden? Rose glanced toward the study door. Ethan was still on his phone call downstairs, his voice carrying up through the old house's thin walls. She looked back at the photograph, studying the woman's face more closely. There was something familiar in her eyes. A warmth that reminded Rose of her own mother, the kind of person who made everyone feel safe and valued. The woman wore a simple gold cross necklace and her hair was styled in the neat waves popular in the early 2000s. That's Rosalie. Rose spun around, nearly dropping the frame. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. I'm sorry, Rose said quickly. I was just dusting. I didn't mean to pry. It's okay. Ethan entered the study slowly, his eyes fixed on the photograph in Rose's hands. I keep it hidden because Vivian doesn't like reminders of my past. Rose set the frame carefully on the desk between them. She's beautiful. She was. Ethan's voice carried a weight that made Rose look up sharply. She died 12 years ago. Died. The words hit Rose like cold water. I'm so sorry for your loss. Ethan sat heavily in his desk chair, staring at Rosalie's smiling face. She was our housekeeper for 8 years. But she was more than that. She was the closest thing I had to a mother after my parents died. Rose felt the world shift slightly. This wasn't what she'd expected to discover about Ethan Kensington's past. Your parents died when you were young? Car accident when I was 6. My grandfather raised me, if you can call it raising. Mostly I was left with housekeepers and tutors while he traveled for business. Rose thought about the little boy in the photograph, looking up at Rosalie with such trust and affection. She took care of you. She saved me. The words came out fierce and quiet. My grandfather believed children should be seen and not heard, preferably not seen either. But Rosalie saw me. Really saw me. Ethan picked up the photograph, his thumb tracing the glass over Rosalie's face. She taught me to tie my shoes and ride a bike. She helped with homework and stayed up with me when I had nightmares. She made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth caring about. Rose's throat tightened. She was beginning to understand something important about the man sitting across from her. What happened to her? Ethan's jaw clenched. Breast cancer. We caught it too late. I was away at college when she got sick, and my grandfather didn't think it was important enough to interrupt my studies for. Oh God. By the time I found out, she was in the final stages. I flew home immediately, but I was too late. She died the day before I arrived. Rose watched tears gather in Ethan's eyes, and something inside her chest cracked open. I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell her what she meant to me. Never got to thank her for being the only person who loved me unconditionally. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared pain. Rose understood now why yesterday had affected Ethan so deeply. She understood the self-loathing in his journal entry. She would have been ashamed of you yesterday, Rose said gently. Ethan's eyes snapped up to meet hers. Instead of anger, she saw confirmation. I know. That's what keeps me awake at night. The thought of Rosalie watching me stand there while another woman who looks like her, who works like her, who probably loves like her, was humiliated in my house. Rose set down her polishing cloth. Tell me more about her. Ethan's face softened. She was from Louisiana originally. Came to Boston for better opportunities, like so many others. She sent most of her paycheck home to help her own mother and younger siblings. Just like me with Aunt Dorothy. She was smart. Smarter than my grandfather ever gave her credit for. She helped me with advanced math when I was 12 because she'd been an accounting major before she had to drop out of college. Dreams deferred. Just like mine. And she was proud. God, she was proud. She took such care with everything she did. Our house was always immaculate, but it was more than that. She made it feel like a home. Rose thought about her own pride in her work, her determination to leave every space better than she found it. She sounds wonderful. She was everything good about my childhood. When I think about becoming a better man, I think about becoming someone she would be proud of. Rose studied Ethan's face, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The guilt, the regret, the genuine love for a woman who'd been dismissed by everyone else as just the help. Why do you hide her picture? Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Vivian thinks it's inappropriate to display photographs of former staff. She says it's sentimental and unprofessional. Of course she does. But you kept it. I could never throw it away. She's the only mother I ever really knew. Rose felt tears prick her own eyes. She thought about her own mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, who died when Rose was 23, leaving her alone in the world except for Aunt Dorothy. My mother cleaned houses too, Rose said softly. Ethan looked up, surprised by the admission. She taught me that honest work had dignity, no matter what people thought. She said that making someone's life cleaner and more beautiful was a gift, even if they didn't appreciate it. What happened to her? Heart attack. She was working a double shift at the hospital, cleaning the maternity ward. She always said babies deserved the cleanest, safest place to come into the world. Rose's voice caught slightly. She collapsed while mopping the floor. Died doing the work she believed in. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. She would have liked Rosalie, I think. They understood something about dignity that people born with money never learn. Which is? Rose met his eyes directly. That your worth as a human being has nothing to do with what you own or where you were born. It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan absorbed them, nodding slowly. Rosalie tried to teach me that. I thought I'd learned it, But yesterday proved I hadn't. Maybe, Rose said carefully, yesterday was when you finally started learning. Ethan looked at her with something like surprise. You could forgive me. After what I allowed to happen. Rose thought about the question seriously. I don't know yet. Forgiveness isn't something you give once and forget about. It's something you choose every day, and it has to be earned. How do I earn it? That's the right question. Finally. By becoming the man Rosalie thought you could be. Ethan picked up the photograph again, studying the little boy who'd once been unconditionally loved. I've spent so much time trying to be what my grandfather wanted, what society expected, what would make me successful. But I never asked what Rosalie would want me to become. What do you think she'd want? Ethan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. She'd want me to see people. Really see them, the way she saw me. She'd want me to use my advantages to help others instead of just accumulating more advantages. Rose nodded. That sounds like someone worth knowing. I don't know if I can become that person. Why not? Ethan gestured around the study, at the expensive furniture and leather-bound books and evidence of inherited wealth. Because I've been the other person for so long. Because changing means admitting I've been wrong about everything. Because it's easier to stay who I am than become who I should be. Rose understood the fear in his voice. Change was terrifying, especially when you had to give up pieces of yourself to make room for growth. My mother used to say that the hardest person to forgive is yourself, Rose said. But you can't become better until you stop making excuses for being worse. Ethan's eyes met hers across the desk. Is that what I've been doing? Making excuses? Yes. But acknowledging it is the first step toward stopping. Ethan set the photograph on his desk where he could see it clearly. For the first time since Rose had been working in this house, Rosalie's smiling face was visible instead of hidden. I want to tell you something else, Ethan said. About why I really couldn't sleep last night. Rose waited, sensing he was about to reveal something important. When I watched you on that kitchen floor, bleeding while you cleaned up garbage, I didn't just see you. I saw Rosalie. I saw every person who'd ever worked in this house, who'd been treated as less than human while they made our lives possible. His voice grew stronger, more determined, and I realized that I'd become exactly the kind of person who would have hurt the woman I loved most. I'd become my grandfather. Rose felt the power of that admission. She understood now why yesterday had broken something in him, why her pain had forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding. But you're not your grandfather, she said. You still have the choice to be different. Do I? After 32 years of being exactly what I was raised to be. Rose thought about her own choices, about the woman she was trying to become despite everything working against her. Every day you wake up, you get to choose who you want to be. The past doesn't have to define your future unless you let it. Ethan stared at Rosalie's photograph for a long moment. When he looked back at Rose, something had changed in his expression. Will you help me? He asked quietly. Help you what? Learn to see people the way Rosalie saw me. Learn to be someone worthy of the love she gave me. Rose felt her heart skip. This was dangerous territory, getting invested in this man's transformation. But looking at his face, seeing the genuine desire for change, she found herself nodding. I can try. But you have to promise me something. Anything. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how uncomfortable the truth is, you don't give up and go back to being who you were. Rosalie deserves better than that. Ethan extended his hand across the desk. I promise. Rose looked at his outstretched hand, clean and soft from a life of privilege, then at her own hands, still bearing the cuts from yesterday's humiliation. Slowly, she reached out and shook his hand. The moment their skin touched, something electric passed between them. Not romantic, not yet, but something deeper. Recognition. Understanding. The beginning of a connection that would change both their lives forever. Neither of them was ready to acknowledge what was happening between them. But in that handshake, with Rosalie's photograph watching over them, Rose Benson and Ethan Kensington began the difficult, dangerous, transformative work of seeing each other as fully human. And in that seeing, the first seeds of an impossible love began to grow. Rose arrived to find the front door already open. Ethan stood in the doorway holding 2 steaming coffee mugs, his gray eyes bright with something she hadn't seen before, genuine warmth. "Good morning," he said, extending one of the mugs. "I remembered you take it black." Rose paused on the front steps. Yesterday's conversation had shifted something between them, but accepting coffee felt like crossing another line entirely. "Thank you," she said, taking the warm ceramic. The coffee was good, better than the instant she made at home. "This is nice. Rosalie taught me how to make it. She said coffee was too important to rush." They stood there for a moment, both holding their mugs, uncertain how to navigate this new dynamic. Rose was still his employee, but they weren't quite the same people who'd met in his study yesterday. "I have a proposition," Ethan said. "If you're willing to hear it." Rose tensed slightly. Propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well for women in her position. "What kind of proposition?" "I want to understand what you do. Really understand it. Would you let me help you clean today?" Rose nearly choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" "I want to learn. I want to see what the work actually involves, what it takes to do it well." Ethan's face was earnest, almost eager. "Rosalie always said you couldn't appreciate something you'd never done yourself." "Mr. Kensington, you don't need to." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "And yes, I do need to. For my own understanding, if nothing else." Rose studied his face, looking for signs this was some elaborate joke or test. Finding none, she shrugged. "It's your house. If you want to clean it, that's your choice." "Where do we start?" Rose led him to her supplies cart, now parked in the front hall instead of hidden by the service entrance. She pulled out cleaning cloths, spray bottles, and a vacuum. "First rule," she said, falling into teaching mode. "Everything has an order. You start high and work down, inside to outside, dry cleaning before wet." Ethan nodded seriously, as if she were explaining merger documents instead of basic cleaning principles. "Why?" "Because gravity works the same for dirt and dust as it does for everything else. Clean the ceiling fan first, the floor last, or you'll just be moving dirt around instead of removing it." She handed him a microfiber cloth and a bottle of furniture polish. "We'll start with the living room. Dust every surface, including things people don't usually notice. Picture frames, lamp bases, the backs of books." Ethan approached a mahogany side table like he was defusing a bomb. He sprayed the polish tentatively and began wiping in small, careful circles. "Not like that," Rose said, moving to stand beside him. "Long strokes, following the wood grain. Like this." She placed her hand over his, guiding his movements. The moment their skin touched, both of them went very still. Rose became acutely aware of his height, his warmth, the expensive scent of his cologne mixing with the lemon polish. Don't complicate this." She pulled her hand away quickly. "You've got it." Ethan cleared his throat and continued polishing, his movements more confident now. "This is harder than it looks. Most things are." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Rose dusting bookshelves while Ethan wrestled with furniture polish and cloth. She found herself stealing glances at him, amused by his intense concentration on tasks she could do in her sleep. "Tell me about your business plan," Ethan said suddenly. Rose paused, a first edition novel halfway to being properly dusted. "What?" "Your cleaning company. You said you wanted to start your own business. Tell me about it." "Why does he care?" "It's not very exciting." "Humor me." Rose set down the book and faced him. "I want to provide residential and small office cleaning with fair wages and benefits. Most companies in this industry treat workers terribly, pay minimum wage, provide no benefits, and have no job security." "And you do it differently?" "Living wages, health insurance, paid sick leave, consistent schedules so people can plan their lives." Rose's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "And profit sharing. The people doing the work should benefit when the company succeeds." Ethan stopped polishing and turned to look at her directly. "That's not just a business plan. That's a mission. I suppose it is. How much startup capital would you need? The question was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that Rose almost answered before she realized what he might be suggesting. Mr. Kensington. Ethan. And I'm asking out of genuine curiosity, not because I'm offering anything. I want to understand the scope of your dream. Rose relaxed slightly. About 50,000 to start small. Enough for equipment, insurance, initial marketing, and wages for the first 6 months while we build a client base. That's very reasonable for a service business. Reasonable if you have it. Impossible when you're living paycheck to paycheck. Ethan nodded thoughtfully and returned to his polishing. What's your timeline? Optimistic. 3 years to save enough for startup costs. Realistic. 5 years, assuming nothing goes wrong. And if something did go wrong? Rose thought about her aunt's medical bills, about unexpected car repairs, about all the ways poverty created its own emergencies. Then it would take longer, or maybe never happen at all. They moved to the dining room, where Ethan tackled the massive wooden table while Rose cleaned the china cabinet. The rhythm of working together felt surprisingly natural. Can I ask you something personal? Ethan said. You can ask. I might not answer. Fair enough. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Do you ever resent us? People like me, I mean. People who inherited everything while you work for everything. Rose considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But resentment doesn't pay bills or change circumstances. I try to focus on what I can control. That's very mature. It's survival. Bitterness is a luxury I can't afford. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I never thought of bitterness as a luxury. Rich people can afford to hate their circumstances because they have the power to change them. Poor people have to accept their circumstances and find ways to work within them. That's not fair. No, it's not. But fairness is another luxury. Ethan set down his cloth and looked at her directly. I'm beginning to understand how much I've taken for granted. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you do something with the understanding. Like what? Rose shrugged. That's for you to figure out. They moved upstairs to the bedrooms. Rose showed Ethan how to properly make a bed with hospital corners, how to clean mirrors without leaving streaks, how to organize a bathroom so everything looked effortless but remained functional. Rosalie used to make my bed every morning, Ethan said, smoothing the duvet with careful attention. I never realized how much skill was involved. Most people don't. They see the result, not the process. I'm seeing the process now. As they worked, conversation flowed more easily. Ethan asked about Rose's night classes, her professors, her favorite subjects. Rose found herself talking about marketing strategies and business ethics, surprised by how engaged he was in her answers. You've really thought this through, he said as they tackled his study together. I've had a lot of time to think. And a good mind to think with. Your professors must be impressed. Rose felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. Some of them. Others think night students are less serious than full-time ones. Their loss. The simple statement, delivered with complete sincerity, made Rose's throat tight. When was the last time someone had defended her capabilities without being asked? By lunchtime, they'd cleaned the entire first floor and most of the second. Ethan collapsed into his desk chair, looking exhausted but oddly satisfied. I'm out of shape for this kind of work. Rose laughed, the sound surprising them both. It gets easier. Does it? Or do you just get stronger? Both, I think. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. I owe you an apology. For what now? For every time I've walked through this house without noticing the work that went into making it beautiful. For taking for granted that everything would always be perfect without ever thinking about who made it that way. Rose felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the hollow apology of someone trying to ease their conscience. This was genuine recognition, hard-earned understanding. Apology accepted, she said quietly. Can I make you lunch? Actually make it, not just offer to buy it. Rose hesitated. Sharing meals felt intimate, personal. But her stomach was growling, and she was curious to see what Ethan Kensington considered cooking. Okay. In the kitchen, Ethan proved surprisingly competent. He made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from scratch, moving around the space with growing confidence. Rosalie taught me, he explained, flipping sandwiches with practiced ease. She said every person should know how to feed themselves and at least one other person. Smart woman. The smartest person I ever knew. They ate at the kitchen island, sitting on high stools like old friends sharing a meal. The food was simple but good, made better by the satisfaction of having earned it through honest work. Rose, Ethan said as they finished eating. Can I tell you something? Of course. Today has been one of the best days I've had in years. Rose looked at him carefully. Why? Because it felt real, useful, like I actually accomplished something that mattered. You cleaned your own house. That's not exactly changing the world. No, but it's a start. It's the first time in my adult life that I've created value instead of just moving money around. Rose understood what he meant. There was satisfaction in physical work, in seeing immediate results from your efforts. It's addictive, isn't it? Making something better with your own hands. Yes. And humbling. I have enormous respect for what you do, Rose. The skill, the stamina, the attention to detail. It's much harder than people realize. Coming from anyone else, the words might have sounded condescending. From Ethan, after a morning of struggling with tasks Rose performed effortlessly, they felt genuine. Thank you, she said. That means something, coming from you. Why? Because you've seen what the work actually involves now. Your respect is informed instead of theoretical. Ethan smiled, and Rose realized it was the first truly genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face completely, making him look younger, lighter, more approachable. Dangerous. This is getting very dangerous. But as they sat in his kitchen, sharing simple food after honest work, Rose found she didn't care about the danger. For the first time in months, she felt seen, valued, understood. Not just as a pair of hands to clean his house, but as a person worth knowing. And when Ethan looked at her like that, with gratitude and growing admiration, Rose Benson began to understand that the impossible might just be possible after all. Rose was arranging fresh flowers in the front hall when she heard the key in the lock. Her stomach clenched with familiar dread. Vivian was back from New York, 3 days earlier than expected. The front door swept open, bringing with it the sound of expensive heels on marble and the sharp click of rolling luggage. Vivian Ashford entered like a storm system, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite travel, her blue coat probably worth more than Rose made in 6 months. I'm back, Vivian called toward the stairs, her voice carrying that particular brightness that meant she expected immediate attention. Rose straightened the flowers one last time and stepped back, hoping to make herself invisible. The past 2 days with Ethan had been different, better, almost magical. But Vivian's presence brought reality crashing back with brutal efficiency. Remember your place. Remember what this really is. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, his face carefully neutral. Over the past 2 days, Rose had learned to read his expressions, but right now he wore the same polite mask he'd shown the world before their conversations began. Vivian, you're early. I missed you too much to stay away, she said, dropping her purse on the hall table that Rose had just polished. And I have the most wonderful news. She spotted Rose then, her blue eyes taking in the scene with sharp intelligence. Rose felt exposed, as if Vivian could see every moment of connection, every shared laugh, every dangerous flutter of feeling that had grown between her and Ethan. Oh good, you're here, Vivian said to Rose, her tone suggesting she was an appliance that had better be functioning properly. I brought back several bags that need unpacking, and I'll need the guest room prepared. My mother is coming for dinner tomorrow. Yes, ma'am, Rose replied automatically. Vivian turned back to Ethan, who had descended the stairs with measured steps. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with possessive enthusiasm. I've been thinking about our future the entire trip, she said, loud enough for Rose to hear every word. About the wedding, about children, about the life we're going to build together. Rose felt something cold settle in her chest. Wedding. Of course. She'd known Ethan was with Vivian, had seen them together, but somehow the past 2 days had made her forget the reality of their situation. What did you think? That he would leave his perfect girlfriend for the cleaning lady? That fairy tales happen to people like you? We should talk about this privately, Ethan said, his voice strained. Why? There's nothing to hide. Vivian's smile was sharp as winter sunlight. Rose doesn't mind hearing about our plans, do you, Rose? It was a trap, and Rose knew it. Answer yes, and she'd seem presumptuous. Answer no, and she'd appear to be eavesdropping on personal conversations. It's not my place to have opinions about your personal life, Miss Ashford. Exactly right. You understand boundaries so well. The word boundaries carried extra weight, as if Vivian suspected those lines had been crossed somehow. Ethan's jaw tightened. Vivian. Oh, don't be so serious, darling. I'm just excited. She turned back to Rose with a smile that never reached her eyes. You can start with my luggage. And be extra careful with the garment bag. It contains my engagement party dress. Engagement party. Rose nodded and moved toward the suitcases, but Vivian's next words stopped her cold. Actually, before you do that, there's something we need to address. Rose's heart began to race. Had Mrs. Fletcher mentioned seeing her and Ethan working together? Had a neighbor reported something inappropriate? I received a very interesting call yesterday, Vivian continued, settling into the living room like a queen holding court. From my friend Catherine Wells. You remember Mrs. Wells, don't you, Rose? The mayor's wife. She was here during the garbage incident. Yes, ma'am. She told me the most fascinating story about what she witnessed here on Wednesday afternoon. Vivian's voice was honey over broken glass. Something about you making quite a mess and then cleaning it up in a rather unusual manner. Rose felt heat flood her cheeks. She glanced at Ethan, who had gone very still. It was an accident, ma'am. The trash bag tore. Oh, I'm not concerned about the accident. Accidents happen. I'm concerned about what Mrs. Wells observed afterward. What could she have observed? I cleaned it up exactly the way Vivian demanded. She said, Vivian continued, that she saw you and my fiancé having quite an intimate conversation in his study later that day. And then again on Thursday morning, she noticed you using the front door instead of the service entrance. Rose's mouth went dry. Mrs. Wells lived next door with a clear view of the front of the house. She would have seen Rose arriving with Ethan waiting for her, coffee in hand. And this morning, Vivian's voice grew colder. She mentioned seeing Ethan working alongside you. Through the windows. Like some kind of domestic partnership. The silence in the room was deafening. Rose could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Ethan's tension radiating across the space. Is there something you'd like to tell me, darling? Vivian asked Ethan, her tone deceptively sweet. Ethan cleared his throat. Rose is an excellent employee. I was simply observing her work methods to better understand household management. Lie. It was so much more than that, and we both know it. How wonderfully hands-on of you, Vivian said. And Rose, do you have anything to add? This was the moment. Rose could tell the truth about the past 2 days, about the connection growing between her and Ethan, about the way they'd looked at each other over lunch yesterday. She could admit that boundaries had been crossed, that feelings had developed, that everything had changed. Or she could protect herself. Protect her job. Protect the fragile hope she'd built over the past few days. Mr. Kensington was very thorough in his evaluation of my work, Rose said carefully. I believe he was satisfied with my performance. It was a safe answer, technically true, completely inadequate. Vivian studied Rose's face with the intensity of a prosecutor examining a hostile witness. I'm sure he was satisfied. The question is whether his satisfaction was appropriate. Vivian, that's enough, Ethan said, his voice sharp. Is it? Because Mrs. Wells seemed to think there was something rather cozy about the whole arrangement. 2 people working so closely together, sharing meals, having long conversations. She knows. Somehow, she knows everything. Rose felt the walls closing in. Every moment of connection, every shared laugh, every dangerous flutter of possibility was about to be twisted into something sordid and shameful. "There's nothing inappropriate happening here," Ethan said firmly. "Isn't there?" Vivian turned to Rose with predatory focus. "Tell me, Rose, do you often eat meals with your other employers?" "No, ma'am." "Do you usually have personal conversations about their childhoods and family histories?" Rose's stomach dropped. How could Vivian know about their conversations? Unless Ethan told her. Unless this whole thing was some kind of test or game. Rose started, then stopped. There was no good answer. "Because that seems rather intimate for a professional relationship," Vivian continued. Almost as if someone had forgotten their place in this household. The words hit Rose like physical blows. Forgotten her place. As if the past 2 days of genuine connection, of mutual respect, of growing feelings had been nothing but delusion on her part. "Rose knows her place," Ethan said quietly. "Does she? Do I?" Rose looked at Ethan, searching his face for some sign of the man who'd worked beside her, who'd listened to her dreams, who'd looked at her like she mattered. Instead, she saw carefully constructed neutrality, the same expression he'd worn when he'd watched her bleed on his kitchen floor. He's choosing her. Of course he's choosing her. What did you expect? "I'm glad to hear it," Vivian said, satisfied. "Because I'd hate for there to be any confusion about the nature of relationships in this house." She moved closer to Ethan, slipping her arm through his with possessive certainty. "Especially now that we're planning our engagement party. I've been thinking December 15th would be perfect. Right here in this house, with all our friends and family celebrating our future together." Rose felt something die inside her chest. December 15th was less than a month away. Whatever she'd imagined was growing between her and Ethan would be officially ended in 4 weeks. "That's very soon," Ethan said, his voice strained. "I know. Isn't it exciting? I can't wait to be Mrs. Kensington." Vivian turned back to Rose with triumph gleaming in her eyes. "You'll be working that evening, of course. We'll need extra help for such an important event. I hope you understand how significant this is for our family." Our family. Not his family. Theirs. A unit that explicitly excluded Rose and everyone like her. "Of course, ma'am. I understand perfectly." And Rose did understand. She understood that the past 2 days had been an aberration, a brief moment when she'd forgotten the fundamental rules that governed her world. Rich men didn't fall in love with their cleaning ladies. Fairy tales didn't happen to women who scrubbed floors for survival. Wonderful. Now, about my luggage. As Rose moved toward the expensive suitcases, she caught Ethan's eye for one brief moment. She saw anguish there, regret, maybe even the ghost of what might have been. But she also saw resignation. He wasn't going to fight for her. Wasn't going to risk his comfortable life, his advantageous marriage, his social standing for someone like her. And why should he? What can I offer him that she can't? What do I have that compares to her beauty, her connections, her ability to fit seamlessly into his world? Rose picked up the first suitcase, its weight nothing compared to the heaviness in her chest. As she climbed the stairs toward the guest room, she heard Vivian's voice behind her, bright with victory and future plans. "Oh, and Rose, I think it would be best if you returned to using the service entrance from now on. We don't want to give neighbors the wrong impression about the nature of your employment here." Service entrance. Back to invisible. Back to knowing my place. Rose nodded without turning around. "Yes, ma'am." As she unpacked Vivian's expensive clothes in the guest room, Rose Benson understood that the beautiful, dangerous, impossible dream of the past 2 days was over. Tomorrow she would return to being just the cleaning lady. Ethan would return to being just her employer. And whatever had bloomed between them in those stolen moments would wither and die, killed by the reality of a world that had no place for love between a billionaire and the woman who cleaned his house. But as Rose hung up Vivian's engagement party dress, a small, stubborn part of her heart whispered that love didn't always follow the rules. The question was whether either of them would be brave enough to break them. Rose stood at the service entrance in the November rain, her finger hovering over the bell. Everything felt different now. The back door felt like what it was, a reminder that she existed at the margins of this world, tolerated but never truly welcome. Ring the bell. Do your job. Collect your paycheck. Survive. But her hand wouldn't move. 24 hours ago, she'd entered through the front door carrying coffee and hope. Today, she was back where she'd started, invisible and disposable. The door opened before she could ring. Ethan stood there in his navy suit, ready for another day of managing his empire. His eyes were rimmed with red, his jaw tight with something that might have been regret. Rose. Mr. Kensington. The formal address felt like broken glass in her mouth. They stared at each other through the rain for a moment that stretched too long. Rose could see everything he wasn't saying, apologies, explanations, maybe even feelings he couldn't afford to acknowledge. But what good are feelings he won't fight for? Come in, he said finally. You're getting soaked. Rose wheeled her cart through the service entrance, noting how the simple action felt like accepting defeat. The kitchen was pristine, untouched by the easy companionship they'd shared just days ago. Vivian's having lunch with her mother today, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. They're planning the engagement party. Of course they are. Where would you like me to start, sir? Ethan flinched at the formal address. The dining room needs attention. We're having dinner guests tonight. Rose nodded and began gathering her supplies. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with everything they couldn't say. Rose, about yesterday. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Kensington. Miss Ashford made the situation very clear. Did she? Because I'm not sure anything is clear anymore. Rose looked up sharply. There was something in his voice, a crack in the careful control he'd maintained since Vivian's return. Your engagement party is December 15th. That seems pretty clear to me. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. That wasn't my choice. Wasn't it? Rose felt anger flare in her chest, hot and clean. Because you seemed perfectly willing to let her make it for you. It's complicated. No, it's not. It's actually very simple. You can choose to be the man Rosalie raised, or you can choose to be your grandfather. But you can't be both. The words hit their target. Ethan's face went pale, but Rose wasn't finished. Rosalie wouldn't have stood by while someone she loved was humiliated. She wouldn't have chosen comfort over courage. And she sure as hell wouldn't have hidden behind, it's complicated, when it came time to defend what was right. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure. Rose's voice rose despite her efforts to stay professional. You think I don't understand pressure? I have $87 in my checking account. My aunt needs medication that costs $200 a month. My tuition is due in 5 days, and I'm 3 credits away from being dropped from the program. She moved closer, her dark eyes blazing with suppressed fury. So don't talk to me about pressure when your biggest problem is choosing between a life of luxury and a life of meaning. Ethan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. For a moment, Rose thought she saw the man who'd worked beside her, who'd listened to her dreams, who'd looked at her like she mattered. Then his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it automatically, and whatever he saw there made his face close off again. I have to go, he said. Blake's waiting for me at the office. The Singapore deal needs my attention. Of course it does. Money always needs his attention more than people do. Rose turned back to her supplies without another word. She heard his footsteps pause at the door, heard him take a breath as if he might say something else. But then the front door closed, and she was alone with her anger and her broken heart. 3 hours later, Rose was polishing silver in the dining room when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. Rose Benson. Yes. This is Dr. Patricia Chen from Boston General Hospital. I'm calling about Dorothy Benson. Rose's blood turned to ice. Aunt Dorothy. The only family she had left. What's wrong? She's had a stroke. A significant one. She's stable now, but you should come as soon as possible. The phone slipped from Rose's hand, clattering to the marble floor. Everything else disappeared. The house, the job, the money, the impossible feelings for a man she could never have. None of it mattered. Aunt Dorothy is all I have left. I can't lose her too. Rose grabbed her purse and ran for the door, leaving her supplies scattered across the dining room table. She needed to get to the hospital, needed to see her aunt, needed to figure out how to pay for whatever came next. At the hospital, Rose found Aunt Dorothy connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical persistence. At 73, her aunt had been Rose's rock after her mother died. The woman who'd taught her to balance dignity with survival, who'd encouraged her to go to school, who'd believed in dreams even when reality suggested they were impossible. The next 24 hours are critical, Dr. Chen explained. We're doing everything we can, but the damage is extensive. Rose nodded, her throat too tight for words. She pulled a chair beside the hospital bed and took her aunt's frail hand in both of hers. I'm here, Aunt Dorothy. I'm right here. The hours passed in a blur of medical consultations and insurance forms Rose couldn't afford to fill out. By evening, the financial reality was clear. The specialized care Aunt Dorothy needed would cost more than Rose made in 2 years. I have to go back to work. I have to keep that job, no matter what it costs me. But even as she thought it, Rose knew something fundamental had changed. Sitting beside her aunt's bed, watching machines keep her alive, Rose understood what truly mattered. Love. Family. Being there for people when they need you most. She thought about Ethan, probably at home having dinner with Vivian and their guests, discussing business deals and social events. She thought about the engagement party being planned, the life he was building with a woman who saw other humans as disposable. He made his choice. Now I have to make mine. Rose pulled out her phone and typed a text message to Ethan. Family emergency. Won't be able to work for the next few days. Will call when I can return. She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and wrote another. My aunt is in the hospital. I need to be with her. I don't know when I'll be back to work. Better. More honest. Less apologetic for putting family before employment. But as her finger hovered over the send button, Rose realized she was still protecting him, still making his life easier by asking for nothing. She deleted that message too and wrote a third. Family medical emergency. Taking time off to be with my aunt at Boston General. This is not a request. Rose hit send before she could second-guess herself again. For the first time in her life, she was putting her own needs first, demanding space to be human instead of just grateful for employment. Her phone rang immediately. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. Rose let it ring. It rang again 5 minutes later. And again 10 minutes after that. Finally, she answered. Rose, what happened? Are you all right? The concern in his voice was real, she could hear it. But it wasn't enough anymore. My aunt had a stroke. I'm at the hospital. Oh God. Rose, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Anything you need? Yes. I need you to be the man who worked beside me instead of the man who hides behind his privilege. I need you to choose courage over comfort. I need you to love me enough to fight for us. But she couldn't say any of that. I need time. To be with her. To figure out what comes next. Of course. Take all the time you need. The job will be here when you're ready. Will it? Or will Vivian use my absence as an excuse to replace me with someone who knows their place better? Thank you, Rose said, because it was easier than explaining that keeping the job might not be worth the cost anymore. Rose. Ethan's voice was softer now, more vulnerable. If you need help with medical bills or anything else. I can't afford your charity, Mr. Kensington. It's not charity. It's... What? What is it? Silence stretched across the connection. Rose waited, hoping he would finally say the words that might make everything different. It's what someone should do for a friend. Friend. The word landed like a blow. I see. Thank you for the offer, but I'll manage. Rose, please. Let me help. The way you helped when Vivian humiliated me? The way you helped when she put me back in my place? That kind of help. That's not fair. Fair. Rose laughed, the sound bitter in the quiet hospital corridor. Nothing about this is fair, Mr. Kensington. But it's honest. She hung up before he could respond. In the silence that followed, Rose stared at her reflection in the hospital window. The woman looking back at her was tired, heartbroken, financially desperate. But for the first time in months, she was also free. Free from the daily humiliation of pretending not to care when she was treated as invisible. Free from the exhausting work of surviving on the scraps of dignity others threw her way. Free from hoping that a man who wouldn't fight for her might somehow be worth loving. Aunt Dorothy was right. Sometimes the only victory we get is surviving with our souls intact. Rose settled back into the uncomfortable hospital chair, her hand finding her aunt's again. Outside the window, Boston continued its relentless rhythm of ambition and survival. Inside this room, love was measured in quiet presence and stubborn hope. Tomorrow, Rose would have to figure out how to pay for her aunt's care. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to go back to a job that was killing her spirit inch by inch. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between safety and self-respect. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. Beside the person who'd taught her that dignity wasn't negotiable, no matter how much it cost. And somewhere across the city, in a house that had never felt emptier, Ethan Kensington was finally beginning to understand what he'd lost by choosing comfort over love. The engagement party was in 2 days, and Ethan stood in his empty house surrounded by florists, caterers, and event planners transforming his home into a celebration of a future he no longer wanted. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. White roses filled every corner. Everything was perfect, except for the gaping hole where his heart used to be. Rose had been gone for 3 weeks and 4 days. Not that he was counting. Vivian swept through the preparations like a general commanding troops, her voice bright with anticipation as she directed the placement of each centerpiece. "The photographer will set up in the living room," she told her assistant, a nervous young man with a tablet. "I want shots of the ring moment from every angle." Ring moment. Tomorrow night, Ethan would officially propose to Vivian in front of 150 of Boston's elite. The ring sat in his desk drawer, a 3-carat diamond that had cost more than most people's cars. It was beautiful, flawless, cold as winter light. "Just like this whole life I'm building. Ethan, darling." Vivian appeared at his elbow, her perfume expensive and cloying. "You look distracted. Second thoughts before our big moment." She laughed as if the idea were absurd. And maybe it was. Maybe this was exactly the life he'd been raised for, the natural conclusion to 32 years of careful preparation. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "Good. Because I've been thinking about our honeymoon. The Maldives would be perfect, don't you think? We could take your yacht." Ethan nodded without really listening. His mind was across town at Boston General, where he'd been sending flowers every other day for 3 weeks. Always anonymously. Always with the same message, "Thinking of you and your family." Rose never acknowledged them, never called to thank him. He told himself he didn't expect her to. But you hope she knows they're from you. You hope she thinks of you, even if it's just to hate you for being a coward. "I've also been considering our first child's name," Vivian continued, oblivious to his distraction. "Something classic. Traditional. What do you think of Kensington Ashford Kensington?" "Our first child." The phrase made Ethan's chest tighten with something between panic and grief. Children with Vivian. A lifetime of polite dinners and charity galas and careful conversations about nothing that mattered. Is this what love is supposed to feel like? This resigned acceptance? His phone buzzed with a text from Blake. "Emergency at the office. Henderson merger falling apart. Need you here now." "I have to go," Ethan told Vivian, already reaching for his coat. "But the florists need your approval on the altar arrangements." Altar arrangements. As if this engagement party were a wedding already. "You have excellent taste. Whatever you choose will be perfect." Vivian beamed at the compliment, and Ethan felt the familiar stab of guilt. She deserved better than a man who was going through the motions of loving her. She deserved someone who looked at her the way he'd looked at Rose that day in his study. "But I'm not that person. I don't know how to be that person." 20 minutes later, Ethan sat across from Blake in the conference room, pretending to care about stock options and merger terms while his business partner delivered the bad news. "Henderson's backing out," Blake said bluntly. They've decided our company culture doesn't align with their values. Company culture? Apparently, word got around about how we treat our staff. Or more specifically, how Vivian treats your staff. Ethan went very still. Explain. Blake pulled out his tablet and showed Ethan a social media post. It was from Mrs. Fletcher, Rose's neighbor advocate, and it had been shared thousands of times. I witnessed something this week that I can't stop thinking about. A young woman, working to support her family and pay for school, was humiliated in ways that no human being should endure. She was forced to clean garbage with her bare hands while wealthy people watched and did nothing. This happened in Boston, in 2024, in a house where charity galas are planned to help the disadvantaged. The woman's name is Rose Benson, and she deserves better. We all deserve better. #dignity for all. #Rose Benson deserves better. The post included a photo of Rose from her college website, smiling in her business administration student profile. She looked radiant, hopeful, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or professional styling. 15,000 shares and counting, Blake said quietly. The story's been picked up by local news. There are calls for boycotts of Kensington Holdings until we address our treatment of service workers. Ethan stared at Rose's photograph, his chest tight with shame and something that might have been pride. Even without naming him or his house, Mrs. Fletcher had ensured that Rose's story would be heard. She got the justice I should have given her. There's more, Blake continued. Someone started a crowdfunding campaign for Rose's aunt's medical expenses. It's raised $43,000 so far. $43,000. From strangers who were moved by her story, who saw the injustice I allowed and decided to act. Ethan closed his eyes, remembering Rose's voice on the phone. I have $87 in my checking account. My aunt needs medication that costs $200 a month. While he'd been planning his engagement party, the entire city had rallied around the woman he'd failed to protect. The Henderson deal is the least of our problems, Blake said. Half our major clients are reconsidering their contracts. The board is calling for an emergency meeting Monday morning. But Ethan wasn't thinking about business anymore. He was thinking about a woman who'd cleaned his house with bleeding hands while he stood by and watched. A woman who'd worked beside him with quiet dignity and shared her dreams of building something better. A woman he'd fallen in love with and then abandoned the moment it became inconvenient. I love her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not the comfortable affection he felt for Vivian. Not the easy compatibility of shared social circles. Love. Real, transformative, terrifying love for a woman who challenged him to be better than he'd ever imagined possible. And I lost her because I was too much of a coward to fight for what mattered. Cancel the Henderson meeting, Ethan said suddenly. Cancel it? Ethan, this could destroy the company. Maybe the company deserves to be destroyed. Blake stared at him as if he'd announced plans to burn down the building. What are you talking about? Ethan stood up, his mind crystallizing with sudden, perfect clarity. I'm talking about becoming the person I should have been 3 weeks ago. The person Rose believed I could be. Rose. The cleaning woman. Her name is Rose Benson. She's a business administration student at Boston Community College. She's building a company that will treat workers with dignity and respect. And she's the best person I've ever known. Blake's eyes widened with understanding. You're in love with her. Yes. And tomorrow night, I'm supposed to propose to someone else in front of half of Boston society. So what are you going to do? Ethan looked out the window at the city where Rose was probably sitting beside her aunt's hospital bed, where 43,000 strangers had shown her more support than he ever had. I'm going to do what I should have done the moment Vivian humiliated her in my kitchen. I'm going to fight for the woman I love. An hour later, Ethan stood in the doorway of Aunt Dorothy's hospital room. Rose sat beside the bed, her hand wrapped around her aunt's frail fingers. She wore jeans and a simple green sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Hello, Rose. She looked up, surprise flashing across her face before her expression hardened into the polite mask she wore for employers. Mr. Kensington. I wasn't expecting you. I needed to see you. To tell you something important. Rose glanced at her sleeping aunt, then back at Ethan. If this is about work, I'm not ready to come back yet. It's not about work. It's about the fact that I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Rose's face went very still. You're getting engaged tomorrow night. No, I'm not. Ethan. My name is Ethan. And I'm not getting engaged tomorrow or any other night. Not to Vivian. Rose stood slowly, her dark eyes searching his face for deception or games. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been a coward and a fool. I'm saying that I watched the woman I love be humiliated in my house and I did nothing to stop it. I'm saying that I've spent 3 weeks planning a future with someone I don't love while the woman who owns my heart was across town fighting battles I should have been fighting beside her. Tears gathered in Rose's eyes, but her voice remained steady. Pretty words, Mr. Kensington. But what are you going to do about it? Everything. I'm going to cancel the engagement party. I'm going to end things with Vivian. I'm going to use my resources to ensure that no domestic worker in the city ever faces what you faced in my kitchen. Ethan moved closer, his voice growing stronger with conviction. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the man Rosalie raised, the man you believed I could be. If you'll let me. And what about your business? Your reputation? Your perfect life? My perfect life is a lie. The only real moments I've had in years were the ones I spent with you. Rose was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. I can't be your project, Ethan. I can't be the woman you saved to make yourself feel better about who you used to be. That's not what this is. Isn't it? The powerful man swooping in to rescue the poor cleaning lady from her circumstances. Ethan shook his head. You don't need rescuing, Rose. You're the strongest person I know. But I need you. I need your courage, your integrity, your ability to see what matters. I need you to teach me how to be human. And if I say no, if I decide I'm better off without the complication of loving someone from your world. The question hit him like a physical blow, but Ethan forced himself to answer honestly. Then I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. But I'll still fight for the changes you believe in. I'll still try to become someone worthy of the love you showed me, even if I never see you again. Rose looked at her aunt's sleeping face, then back at Ethan. She's going to be okay, Rose said finally. The doctors say she'll need rehabilitation, but she's going to recover. I'm glad. I've been worried about both of you. The flowers were from you. Yes. And the crowdfunding campaign? That was Mrs. Fletcher and 43,000 people who saw your story and wanted to help. I had nothing to do with it. Rose smiled for the first time since he'd entered the room, and Ethan felt his heart stutter in his chest. You know what the beautiful thing about that campaign is? Rose asked. What? It showed me that most people are good. That when they see injustice, they want to fix it. They just need someone to show them how. You showed them. Mrs. Fletcher showed them. The internet showed them. Sometimes it takes a village to fight for what's right. Ethan nodded, understanding. Will you let me be part of that village? Rose looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw the exact moment when her walls came down, when love won over fear. On one condition. Anything. No more service entrances. Ever. For anyone. Ethan laughed, the sound bright with relief and joy. Deal. And no more watching people suffer while you decide whether it's convenient to help them. Never again. And no more hiding pictures of people you love because someone else finds them inappropriate. Rosalie's picture is on my mantle now, where it belongs. Rose stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, could smell the faint scent of hospital soap and hope. And one more thing. Yes. Kiss me like you mean it. Like I'm not just the cleaning lady you fell in love with, but the woman you're going to build a real life with. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. You were never just the cleaning lady. You were always the woman who was going to save my soul. When he kissed her, It tasted like coffee and courage, like second chances and promises kept. It tasted like love that was worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth everything he'd been too afraid to risk. When they broke apart, Rose smiled the smile that had haunted his dreams for weeks. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now I go home and cancel an engagement party. Then I spend tomorrow helping you plan your business instead of planning my wedding." "And after that?" Ethan thought about the answer, about the life they could build together if they were brave enough to break all the rules. "After that, we change the world. One dignified interaction at a time." Outside the hospital window, Boston sparkled in the December sunset, a city full of possibilities and people worth fighting for. Inside the room, a billionaire and a cleaning lady held each other close, their love a quiet revolution that would ripple outward in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won in boardrooms or ballrooms. Sometimes they're won in hospital rooms and humble kitchens, by ordinary people who choose courage over comfort and love over everything else. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, love really does conquer all. A year later, Rose stood in the lobby of the newly renovated Kensington Community Center, watching Aunt Dorothy cut the ribbon with steady hands. The stroke had left her aunt with a slight tremor, but her spirit remained unshakable. The rehabilitation had been complete, paid for by the crowdfunding campaign that had raised over $90,000 total. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl," Aunt Dorothy whispered as cameras flashed around them. The community center had been Ethan's idea, but Rose's vision. Built in the heart of Roxbury where she'd grown up, it provided job training, small business loans, and childcare for working families. The second floor housed Rose's company headquarters, Dignity Cleaning Services, now employing 43 people with full benefits and profit sharing. "Mrs. Kensington," a reporter called out. Rose still smiled every time she heard her married name. "How does it feel to see your dream become reality?" "It feels like proof that when good people work together, anything is possible," Rose replied, her hand finding Ethan's automatically. Across the room, Blake Harrison chatted with Jenny Liu, who'd expanded her cafe into a catering business specializing in events at the community center. Their partnership had blossomed into something more than professional after Rose introduced them at her wedding. "What about the controversy surrounding your husband's break from the family business?" another reporter pressed. Ethan stepped forward, his voice clear and confident. "Kensington Holdings continues under new leadership that aligns with the values my grandfather built the company on. I chose to build something new with my wife because we believe business should serve communities, not the other way around." The transition hadn't been seamless. Ethan had faced legal challenges from the board, social ostracism from former friends, and financial complications that took months to resolve. But Blake had remained loyal, helping him extract his inheritance legally and ethically to fund their new ventures. "And Miss Ashford?" a third reporter asked. "Any comment on your former relationship?" Rose tensed slightly, but Ethan's response was gracious. "Vivian deserved honesty from the beginning. She's engaged to someone who can give her the life she wants, and I wish them both happiness." It was true. Vivian had rebounded quickly, announcing her engagement to a hedge fund manager within 6 months. The society pages had covered their elaborate wedding in the Hamptons with obvious approval. Some endings were merciful for everyone involved. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Fletcher approached with her characteristic warm smile. At 68, she'd become the center's volunteer coordinator and Rose's unofficial grandmother figure. "You've done something beautiful here," she said, gesturing around the bustling space where children played while their parents attended job training classes. "We've done something beautiful," Rose corrected. "That social media post you wrote changed everything." "Justice delayed isn't justice denied if good people refuse to stay quiet," Mrs. Fletcher replied. "Besides, I just told the truth. You two did the hard work of living it." Later that evening, Rose and Ethan sat in their modest Cambridge apartment, reviewing applications for the next round of small business loans. The apartment was a fraction of the size of his Beacon Hill house, which he'd sold to fund the community center. But it was theirs, filled with wedding photos, Aunt Dorothy's quilts, and Rosalie's picture prominently displayed on the mantel. "Do you ever miss it?" Rose asked, looking up from a loan application for a woman wanting to start a landscaping business. "The big house, the social events, the easy life?" Ethan considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked hard things. "I miss the illusion that I was a good person without having to do the work of being one," he said finally. "But I don't miss being empty. I don't miss waking up every day knowing I was wasting the advantages Rosalie died wishing she'd had." Rose nodded, understanding. They'd had this conversation in various forms over the past year, working through the complexity of his sacrifice and her guilt about it. "The Henderson Company called again today," she mentioned casually. "They want to partner with us on a new project." "The same company that canceled their merger because of our company culture?" "The very same. Funny how treating people with dignity suddenly became good business." They laughed together, the sound echoing in their small but happy home. "Rose," Ethan said, setting aside his stack of applications. "I have something to tell you. Good something or bad something?" "Good something. Great something, actually." His gray eyes sparkled with excitement. "Boston Community College called. They want to offer you a full scholarship to complete your MBA." Rose's breath caught. "What?" "Full tuition, plus a stipend for living expenses. They want you to be their first case study in social entrepreneurship." Tears filled Rose's eyes. The degree she'd dreamed of, fought for, sacrificed for, was finally within reach, not as a burden but as a gift. "There's more," Ethan continued. "Harvard Business School wants to interview you for their Social Impact Fellowship. Full funding, 2 years, with a guaranteed internship at any nonprofit of your choice." "Harvard!" Rose's voice was barely a whisper. The same Harvard that wouldn't have looked twice at a cleaning lady 2 years ago. Times change when the right people demand they change. Rose stood and moved to the window overlooking the Charles River, where college students jogged along paths she'd once only dreamed of walking as a peer. "What do you think I should do?" Ethan joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I think you should follow your dreams wherever they lead, even if they lead away from me for a while." Rose turned in his arms, studying his face. "You'd really support me taking 2 years at Harvard?" "I'd support you taking a lifetime at Harvard if that's what made you happy. I fell in love with your mind, Rose. I want to see how far it can take you." "And what would you do while I was gone?" "Run the community center. Expand our loan program. Try to be worthy of coming home to." Rose kissed him then, tasting salt from her own tears and the sweetness of a future that held infinite possibilities. "I love you, Ethan Kensington." "I love you too, Rose Benson Kensington. More than I ever thought it was possible to love another human being." As they held each other in their small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of lives rebuilt and dreams achieved, neither could have imagined how far they'd come from that terrible November day when garbage scattered across marble floors. But love had a way of transforming even the ugliest moments into foundations for something beautiful. And sometimes, if people were brave enough to choose each other over everything else, fairy tales really could come true. The Kensington Community Center now serves over 3,000 families annually. Dignity Cleaning Services has expanded to 5 cities and maintains a 98% employee retention rate. Rose completed her Harvard Fellowship and returned to Boston to launch a non-profit consulting firm that helps companies implement ethical labor practices. Ethan's transformation became a case study at Harvard Business School, taught in courses on corporate social responsibility. His former colleagues who questioned his sanity now seek his advice on sustainable business practices. Aunt Dorothy celebrated her 75th birthday by announcing her engagement to Pastor Samuel Hayes, whom she'd met during her rehabilitation. Their wedding was held at the community center, with Rose as matron of honor and Ethan walking Aunt Dorothy down the aisle. Mrs. Fletcher was named Boston's Volunteer of the Year for her work exposing labor injustices through social media advocacy. She continues to keep a watchful eye on her neighborhood, ensuring that dignity and respect aren't just ideals but daily practices. And sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, Rose and Ethan still clean their apartment together, working side by side as equals, remembering that the most important revolutions begin with 2 people who refuse to accept that love has limitations. Because in the end, that's what love is. The decision to see each other fully, to fight for each other fiercely, and to build something together that's more beautiful than anything either person could create alone. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.